Let's talk. We wanna welcome you to SAZETU. Let's talk. The show's alive because of SAZETU.
SAZETU is brought to you by Maine Spirits. Learn more about the delicious spirits they import into the great state of Maine and the cocktails you can make with them at mainspirits.com or by downloading their app for your smartphone or visiting them on Instagram at Maine_spirits. Promotional consideration by State Theatre Portland. Visit statetheatreportland.com for an up-to-date schedule of virtual events and upcoming announcements as we get closer to normalcy. And Sun Tiki Studios, a top-notch rehearsal and performance facility located on Forest Avenue in Portland, Maine. Learn more at suntikistudios.com.
Welcome to Happy Hour, a program wherein I try to show you how to make delicious cocktails in the comfort of your own home. This show is brought to you by Maine Spirits. Maine Spirits bring all of the delicious liquors and liqueurs into the great state of Maine. It is my job to show you how to make drinks with those spirits. We've been sticking on particular themes, aka liqueurs, lately, and we're going to jump in with Cointreau now. Cointreau, square bottle, orange cap, nice font. What is it? It's an orange liqueur, not dissimilar to Triple Sec or Grand Marnier, but a very tasty liqueur. One of the ways that people use it commonly is in a margarita. So I thought I'd lean into the margarita, whereas a lot of people will be comfortable there, but I'm going to kick it up a notch, and we're going to make the orange celery margarita. For tools, we'll need a shaker, a strainer, a jigger, a paring knife, and a rocks glass. For ingredients, Cointreau, Blanco tequila, celery juice, fresh lime juice, fresh orange juice, and an orange slice. So before we start, how do you make celery juice? You can blend it or mash it up and just basically strain out the juice. You're just looking for the water within celery, basically. So let's build this drink. In a shaker full of ice, add the following: 1 ounce of Cointreau, 2 ounces of tequila, 1 ounce of celery juice, a half ounce of fresh lime juice, and a half ounce of fresh orange juice. Now shake that until cold. Shake it, shake it, shake it. Now pour it into a rocks glass full of ice and garnish with an orange slice. Let's take a refreshing sip. A take on a classic. The Cointreau certainly kicks it up a notch from just Triple Sec, and having that celery juice in there really turns a standard cocktail on its ear in the best possible way. This has been Happy Hour, brought to you by Maine Spirits. You can learn more about this drink and many other drinks at mainspirits.com. You can download their app for your smartphone or follow them on Instagram at Maine_spirits, but please drink deliciously and responsibly.
Hey, Spence. Guess
Sir.
what? March is Women's History Month.
I read this.
I personally don't know anything about being a woman.
No experience on my end either.
But I read a story last week that I think you may share here momentarily, that got me thinking about, throughout history, there have been women doing awesome things.
This is true.
And a lot of times they don't get the credit.
Yes, and specifically in our world of entertainment, there are lots of accomplishments by our female friends and counterparts that, because of the way the entertainment industry has been and still is to a lesser degree, but not, problem not solved yet. This is very true for many great works that we love.
I'm always, or have been surprised, I guess, about there are so many nerdy things that I have loved throughout my life that have always been associated with, you're never going to get a girlfriend if you spend all your time watching Star Trek, and then, but of course, it turns out we're women involved in every creative aspect of even nerdy things like Star Trek.
Well, see, I think that adage still applies. Like, you're probably never going to find a girlfriend watching it, but you might if you were part of making it.
That's why I'm still single.
That's
and pushing
right.
40.
You need to make a science fiction program, not just take them in.
I've made all the wrong moves here.
Yes.
I need to redo my entire life.
That's right. Command Z. How many levels of undo could I use? Good
How
Lord.
great would that be?
That would be something.
If only you could like. I think I would do less Command Z and more highlight, deleter.
Oh, you just like
Copy, paste elsewhere.
go to somebody else's good life, take their good ideas and good decisions, paste
I
into
was
yours.
thinking about like, maybe if I could take a good decision that I made in my like late 30s and copy and paste that over to like my early 20s to avoid making the shitty decision.
Oh,
then.
Yeah, I would probably delete from age 12 until yesterday. just slap it all together, and I'd be like, that's the boy. That's the man we hoped this boy would turn out to be.
So you do Apple N and just bring up a fresh document.
Yeah, I would. I really would. Yeah. So Zach, the article you sent me was from Billboard magazine, and it was paraphrasing an interview with a woman named Rita Coolidge, who only just recently, for whatever reason, decided to kind of make public that it was she who co-wrote the piano coda to Derek and the Dominoes' Layla, which up until now is credited to session drummer and drummer of that group, Jim Gordon. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, existing recordings of the tune back that up.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. I think so. What I sent you was an excerpt from her 2016 memoir, where she tells that whole story, and it's. I think both of you you and I are in agreement that the piano coda of Layla is the best part of the song
by a long shot. It's like that's the part that I'll finally turn back up on the radio when it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like I sit through the rest of it just to get to that.
Yes, that's right. I didn't realize actually in reading that I didn't realize that that book came out in 2016. So I thought that was like a present revelation, but
yeah,
still
it was a present revelation for me.
Yeah, it's fairly recent anyway.
Yeah. I was listening to the Chris and Rita, their first duet record, Chris Christopherson, Rita Coolidge, and I have a couple of her other records, and I pulled those out and started listening to them, and as I often do, started reading about her, and that story came up, and I had noticed that Booker T plays on a bunch of her records of Booker T and the MGs, and in my further reading, I discovered that Booker T was dating her sister Priscilla Coolidge, and they actually made a record together. And the song that Rita Coolidge and Jim Gordon had written that uses that piano coda was a song called Time, and Booker T and Rita Coolidge actually recorded that.
Therein lies the evidence.
Yeah, because in her story she talks about Jim Gordon basically came over, like they were dating because they were in Joe Cocker's Mad Dogs and Englishmen band together. And he came over and started working on this song, and she basically like wrote the counter melody and like answer to it, like the whole kind of back half to that. And she wrote lyrics and a melody to it, and that was that song. And apparently they played it to Eric Clapton and Bobby Whitlock at one point. And they made a tape and gave him the tape, and then just never heard anything again. She and Jim Gordon broke up. Jim Gordon joined Derek and the Dominoes, and then like a year later, she had just finished recording her first solo record, her debut record, and she was at a photo shoot, and the radio was on, and the end of Layla came on. She was like, "Where do I recognize that from?" It's like, "Oh shit, that's my song." And she said she bought the record expecting to see her credit there, and it was just Eric Clapton, Jim Gordon, and not her name. And she mentioned it to her producer and the head of her label, and they were just like, you don't have the money to fight. I think it's Robert Stigwood was.
I believe that's
manager.
true. Yeah, it was some sort of feared manager at the time.
Yeah,
Or
I
lawyer
guess
or
had
whatever.
some sort of powerful organization, but they were just like, yeah, you can't fight this, and she didn't, and I don't know.
It's a shitty story, and it happens a lot. I've been around it, I've seen it, and I can kind of relate, to that feeling of being like, well, what am I going to do about it? But yeah, so we thought after reading that, and then also with the recognition that this is Women's History Month, that we would go through and celebrate in what we kind of hope to be a recurring segment on the show, the unsung hero, right, would be the segment. And today, I think that we would like to kind of go through a list of our own influences that maybe we don't feel like are getting enough credit, but then culminating with focus on two female contributors to the nerd culture that Zach and I love so damn much.
And they've contributed to apparently all the wrong life decisions I've made that have kept me keep me single right now.
Hey, at least we have each other.
That's right. And we have this content to fall back on.
That's right. And this living podcast that we're in.
That's right.
Hi, SAZETU.
Hello, Spencer.
Hi, SAZETU.
Hello, Zach. It's nice to host you.
So, we have made a list and assigned each other talking points. This is our first scripted episode, so roll with us here. We're trying to get more organized. We're trying to get more
scripted.
organized.
Scripted is in air quotes.
Yeah, scripted. Any preparation whatsoever. But there's a list. Yeah, so Rita Coolidge we mentioned. I grew up with Lucille Ball, who, along with her partner, Desi Arnaz, so Desi Lou, produced not only I Love Lucy, obviously, but most important to Zach and I would be Star Trek. The original Star Trek was a Desi Lou production, and also explains why Star Trek had such high production value, because they really got behind it. And they also produced Mission Impossible, and Lucille Ball was one of the first, if not the first, female executive at a production company in Hollywood.
Also, I have not seen a lot of I Love Lucy episodes. I feel like it's more one of those things that's like ingrained in the fabric of pop culture, but I haven't sat down and binged it all. But I know that I Love Lucy was one of the first TV sitcoms to delve into, I mean, still in a lightly comedic way, but delve into issues like pregnancy and, regular human stuff and not just ridiculous situations.
Yeah, they got a lot of pushback at the time. In fact, I would have to read, but I don't know if they got into hot water because they addressed pregnancy or used the word pregnancy for the first time. But yeah, so Lucille Ball was not just a TV star, but a huge force and a huge driver behind a great deal of the high quality content that came out of the late 50s through the late 60s. Additionally, I would like to speak to Gilda Radner.
Ooh.
Yes, who is one of my favorites of all time.
She's excellent.
Yes, I grew up with Gilda in my life. I think probably introduced through Sesame Street or Muppet Show appearance or something. But then in my teenage years, when I got interested in Saturday, you know what makes me feel better? I listened to Conan's podcast, and he can't say the word Saturday either. He says Saturday, just like I do. Saturday. So take that, Chuck.
Totally.
But SNL, we'll say. When I got into SNL and its history, and then her live performances, Gilda Live, and she also died kind of right around the same time I really was starting to get into her stuff, so that made it extra tragic. And she, from my standpoint, not thinking about how hard it would have been for women, I mean, at SNL famously at this point, back in the day, that's not the vibe she put out there. She made it seem like it's like easy breezy, you know.
Totally in control.
Yeah, totally in control. But meanwhile,
I'm driving
she's
the ship.
fighting a tide. Similarly, Lily Tomlin is a favorite of mine. I actually get to see her at the State Theater.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was like watching, I don't know, like the Statue of Liberty or something. You know, some national monument.
I think my introduction to both of those women was like a TV infomercial for like a Best of Saturday Night Live VHS or something.
Oh, wow.
Just
Okay.
happened to highlight, characters played by both of them a lot in that ad. And then when I started watching SNL reruns later on, it's like, oh yeah, there's that sketch that was in those commercials.
Right. Lily was all over the children's, like the PBS programming as well. And she had this like character where she, probably in her 30s at that point, played a kid. And they built, the set was like her on an extra huge chair.
Oh yeah, so, that was also used in SNL, wasn't it? Didn't she?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of characters that were interchangeable at that time, and that remained the case like through the 80s. Like John Candy brought his Schmengi Brothers character over from SCTV to SNL. Sesame Street. If you ever saw John Candy playing clarinet, speaking with a Polish accent, that has a much. In fact, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, the listener, I recommend that you YouTube the Schmengi Brothers, which were Eugene Levy and John Candy appearing on David Letterman Late Night, the early version. YouTube them performing a song called Cabbage Rolls and Coffee. Good.
Nice.
Yeah, but so that same era, like there was a lot of cross-pollination, and that's kind of how I found a lot of these people brought me from. And actually, I'll parlay this right into Carol Burnett. Like Lucille Ball, had a later version of her show had a like kind of a puppetoon claymation intro, which caught my interest as a kid and dragged me in. I then enjoyed the show later when I had the ability to have complete thoughts. Carol Burnett started and ended with an animated thing, but also was much more goofy. And of course, Carol Burnett produced the show with her husband. There's actually a great podcast on Alec Baldwin's podcast, a great episode on his show where he interviews her, and she talks about her experience there, like co-producing with her husband, and a lot of the doors that like he would have to kick down for her, just because of blatant sexism at the time. But she's obviously a genius, like not only a performer, but a producer. The cast that she assembled for that show was unbelievable. Harvey Korman. And why can I never remember his name? The Dorfon golf guy, Tim.
I don't know if I remember Dorf.
I always forget his name.
Tim Conway.
Right. But I mean, Harvey, just to go back to Harvey Korman, he ended up, imbued in that Mel Brooks world, where another show we want to get into. So I'm going to just touch and go on this topic. Madeline Kahn is another one. Cloris Leachman, like all these people that ended up in these. We want to do a show on the complete entertainer, and those two people kind of fall in there. And actually, so does Carol Burnett. So we could bring her back in there. The dancing, the singing, the comedy. Carol was like a master of the physical comedy as well. And then a segment from that show called Mama's House ended up going on to become an even bigger show than the Carol Burnett show, and ran for years and years, which Carol Burnett starred in initially, but I think they then moved away from. I think she kind of retired from the show, but the show lived on and on in syndication for like over a decade, I think.
I don't know if I'm familiar with that one. I think like the other women we've talked about, I think a lot of my early introductions to that was, I think, another Best of Carol Burnett show VHS collection infomercial or whatever.
Right. Well, this is probably where that 5 years between us becomes more obvious than it would say in like the 90s or the 2000s or whatever. You're right. But yeah, I have my early experiences. There was still a lot of old school entertainers that were part of entertainment when I was starting to take it in. For instance, we were discussing the Muppet Show earlier, which Disney Plus is now streaming, and going back and looking at characters like Victor Borga, for instance. That's also kind of what kickstarted our conversation about Madeline Kahn. But again, onto her in a different episode. And then I would conclude my portion of the list before it says Zach starts talking with Whoopi Goldberg, who EGOT. My introduction to Whoopi was in movies. It was I didn't see Jumpin' Jack Flash when it came out, but I remember when it came out. I think the first time I saw her was in The Color Purple, if I remember correctly. But then there was all the comic relief stuff.
Yeah, I think that was what I remember her from initially, was all the comic relief stuff. And then, and then seeing like the Jumpin' Jack Flash trailer and her kind of rise to stardom as a movie star. And then, of course, Star Trek.
Right. So by the time Star Trek came along, I already knew who Whoopi was. Like, having Whoopi be also part of that triumvirate of 80s, comedy legends, right? Her, Robin Williams, and Billy Crystal were kind of inseparable throughout that decade. I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, there's like the Sister Act movies. Ghost, her appearance in Ghost.
Yeah, Academy Award-winning appearance in Ghost.
That's right. That would be the of the EGOT.
That's right.
I don't know, but just like how, when she appeared on Star Trek, it was like, wait, what? Like,
that was also before movie stars were on TV a lot.
100%.
Now it's like every show has a movie star in it, but back then it was like you'd graduate from TV to the movies, and she kind of skipped television and went right to being a movie star, and then was like, oh, but Star Trek, I want to be on that.
Yeah, well, she was on. They wrote the part for her at her request.
Yeah,
and I certainly wasn't used to Star Trek being cool, but like, having Whoopi on the show is like, why? See, take that, Star Wars.
Everything, I guess, eventually leads back to Star Trek.
Yes, including what I believe you're going to jump into right now.
Precisely. This is actually the first thing I thought of when I thought of this. Started thinking about this show, and Dorothy Catherine Fontana, professionally known as DC Fontana because initials are gender neutral. She was the head writer and story editor on Star Trek, and she started working with Gene Roddenberry on his first show, which only ran for one season, which I've never seen, called The Lieutenant. And I guess she started working with him as a secretary, but showed interest in writing. And basically he started developing Star Trek immediately after that show got canceled, and included her in it from the start. And so she was one of the main writers. And I think midway through the first season is when he fired his story editor and promoted her to lead editor, which she did for a season and a half. And then the third, I think she found maybe being the editor a little bit restricting because the workload was, sometimes she would rewrite somebody else's story from top to bottom.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure on your shoulders.
Yeah, and then not get the credit for it, too, because she was just the editor. So yeah, she left after the second season, but continued to contribute stories as a freelance writer. And all of those were credited to the pseudonym Michael Richards before the other Michael
Richards
exist.
Which is where Michael Richards' parents
That's right.
of Seinfeld got the idea to name him that.
They're inspired by their favorite third season episodes of Star Trek.
That's right. Michael Richards' original name was Jim Williams. I was struggling to think of another almost two first name.
Yeah. But yeah, she also went on to be the associate producer on the animated Star Trek in the late 70s. And she was an associate producer on Star Trek The Next Generation and wrote the pilot episode and a bunch of first and second season episodes on Next Generation. But apparently she had a falling out with Roddenberry. Like, I guess a bunch of the writers did, just because his rules for the first couple seasons of Next Generation became a little bit restrictive to the writers.
I'd heard that.
And then she also she wrote a ton of other stuff in between those. So, yeah, DC Fontana. And then I wanted to jump into the music world real quick and mention a R&B singer named Johnny Mae Matthews, who's not super well known.
I did not know of this person until
now. She moved to Detroit in the late 40s and started, couldn't find anybody to release her music. So she basically started her own vanity label like all of us do these days.
Yeah, right.
And it was called Northern Recording. And so she started the label to put out her own records, basically. But she started working with some of the musicians that would become the Funk Brothers at Motown, like Joe Hunter, James Jamerson, Uriel Jones. And she also discovered the Temptations, who were at the time known as The Distance. And then a year later, she started her Northern Recording in 1958, and Berry Gordy started Motown in 1959. And basically, he went to her and was like, "How do I do this?" And she kind of gave him the run of, this is how it works. And she helped Motown get the distribution through, I think it was through Chess Records originally. And then she, a lot of the artists that she kind of fostered the early parts of their career obviously migrated over to Motown, and she was offered to do the same, but did not. And she's kind of faded into obscurity, but played a huge part in that early Detroit R&B scene.
Who knew?
Who knew? And apparently she wrote Mary Wells's "Bye Bye Baby," one of her early hits, and was uncredited on that. But
why was she uncredited?
I don't know, actually.
Yeah, I mean, was it one of those deals like all of Elvis's songs he quote wrote?
Yeah, or it could be like the Rita Coolidge situation. I haven't looked into it as deeply yet. So, and then slightly more famous, I wanted to mention Carol Kay. I mean, I feel like her fame has sort of come to the forefront, especially in the past 5 or 6 years or so, with the Wrecking Crew documentary and book that came out. But she was like a ripping jazz guitarist, moved to LA and was playing throughout the clubs. First played on Sam Cooke's Summertime was her first studio work, which she played guitar on, and then played guitar on a whole bunch of other hits like La Bamba and songs like that before she switched to bass, just because I guess the guitar field was getting a little crowded. And basically like revolutionized bass guitar and played on a bunch of Beach Boys stuff, played on a lot of Phil Spector's big hits, and so she's just the woman behind the scene. And
in that era, I think it's safe to say that if you were to choose three names that push the envelope of bass playing in pop music, it would be her, James Jamerson, and Paul McCartney. They're almost like, and I feel like Paul McCartney would say the same thing. Definitely. About those two. In fact, he has. He cites them. Right.
I mean, they're definitely the ones I think of as my top three. She was also the only female involved in that whole Wrecking Crew situation. I mean, apart from the singers, she was the only studio musician that was working in the studios every day, playing on all that stuff. So I don't imagine that was very easy either. I mean, how dudes just sit around and if they're not telling fart jokes, they're just actually farting.
They're telling balls jokes.
Yeah, they're telling balls jokes.
So we just can't even help it.
Yeah. So yeah, that I can't imagine that was well, I don't know. I mean,
it probably was not easy at all.
Yeah, probably not at all.
I mean, even if you are with, a bunch of people that are your buddies and you love them and they love you, if you are the only person in a situation, which is a rare occurrence for me in my life, right? But if you're the only person who looks like you or, it has your experience, it's like, that's isolation, I would assume, right?
Yeah.
Of a certain, even if it's within friendly company. Takes drink of water.
Yeah,
Point made. Confidently drinks water.
Water drop instead of a mic drop.
Yep.
Dope. Created a mess here. Another Carol K of sorts, Carol King, who obviously is famous because she has the 81st best-selling album of all time, which is 1971's Tapestry, with 14 million units sold. But before she was a superstar in her own right, for basically the entire decade of the 60s, she was co-writing songs with her husband, Jerry Goffin. I think they started writing songs together and got married. But he basically was a lyricist, and she wrote all the music for all those early hits. And, yeah, they just wrote basically every hit song for
like so
a long
many.
time. Bobby V, Take Good Care of My Baby, which the Beatles covered. Locomotion by Little Eva, who was their babysitter at the time.
Then later covered by Tiffany in 1987.
That's right. Most importantly, Chains by the Cookies, which was also later covered by the Beatles.
Yep.
One Fine Day, Up on the Roof. So, and actually...
she did Up on the Roof?
Up on the Roof. That was a Goffin and King song. Pleasant Valley Sunday for the Mondays. The Mondays. The Monkeys. With a case of the Mondays.
Case of the Mondays.
Natural Woman, Aretha Franklin.
That's a huge one.
Yeah, she was just a hit-making machine for a decade before she came out and became a hit maker as an artist and not just a songwriter as well.
Have you ever seen the Kennedy Center? The Kennedy Center Honors, wherein they honor Carol King.
I remember watching it at the time.
Well, there's just one moment where I just feel like, because Aretha comes out and sings that song, because who else would you have sing that song?
Exactly.
And I feel like even though it's like this full, theater with balconies and all that, Aretha is like looking at Carol and singing it. I don't know. It's like one of those. It admittedly, it does not take a lot for me to tear up. It really doesn't.
Yeah, but you're also talking about like one of the greatest singers of all time singing the song by one of the greatest songwriters of all time.
Then like the camera work, like goes to Aretha and then it goes to Carol, and she's just like, it's just like, this is awesome.
I can imagine even with that many hits under your belt by so many different artists, there's got to be like, in all these decades later, still just like seeing Aretha Franklin sing your song and destroy it like that. Must be quite a feeling.
Like, no discredit to all of the other songs that you mentioned. They're all great tunes. But like, that song is kind of like, that's the kind of song that cements you permanently in history. Right? Like that's,
for sure.
That's like Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Yeah. Even if there weren't any other songs, that one would have done the job.
That's right.
And then just sort of wanted to mention real quick Diane Warren, who pretty much picked up the Carole King mantle, I think, for like the 80s and the 90s, just writing a ton of hits for like Rhythm of the Night by DeBarge was kind of her Kickstarter. And then Unbreak My Heart, Toni Braxton, How Do I Live, Leon Rimes. Like she's still cranking out hits.
Don't Turn Around, Ace of Base.
That's right.
And most importantly, Blame It on the Rain, Milli Vanilli.
Yes, most importantly.
Side note, very briefly, when we were on, I was on the same record label that Milli Vanilli was on a long time before I was on it. And I was trying to convince my bandmates, who were also on that label at the time, that we should record that song. And I thought it was like a very perfect double-edged sword because A, he'd be throwing a Milli Vanilli cover back at the Arist Records, and I don't know if you remember the scandal around that. The problem with Milli Vanilli was that the two fellas on the album cover and in the music videos didn't actually sing the record. So that didn't reflect very well. But I also thought it was a great double-edged sword because the song Blame It on the Rain is awesome.
Yeah, and it's a proven hit.
It's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know. If you could do the whatever Apple N or somehow get back to that situation and
actually do it.
I would advise you guys to follow through on that.
Well, one of two things would have happened. A, we would have re-recorded that song and had great success with it because it's a proven hit. Or B, we would have been dropped immediately and could have avoided a lot of suffering and waiting before getting dropped eventually.
Win-win either way.
Win-win either way.
Okay, I'm gonna transition into the movies now. Enough music-ies. Let's talk about movies.
Nice Mr. Show reference.
I know this woman is not everybody's not everybody's favorite person right now, just because there are some people that are not happy with the new direction of Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
But Kathleen Kennedy, who is currently the head of Lucasfilm,
Mm-hmm.
she's basically produced all of our favorite movies since the 80s.
That's exactly right. Like, blaming her for not liking the direction of Star Wars now does in no way discredits her contribution. That'd be like blaming the Who, erasing the Who's history because you don't like their new record or something. Like, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you don't like the new Star Wars? How about Jurassic Park? How's that sit with you?
Does that work for you?
Is that all right for you?
Yeah, she started as an assistant to Steven Spielberg when he was making 1941, not his highest moment.
No.
But she became a producer on E.T. and has co-produced almost every film that Steven Spielberg has done since then. Mm-hmm. And obviously worked with Lucasfilm when that crossed over doing the Indiana Jones and in those movies. And she was also married to Frank Marshall, who is also a producer on Raiders of the Lost Ark and those films. And they started the Kennedy Marshall production company before she left that to lead up Lucasfilm when that was sold to Disney.
Right. So, I mean, if people are, I assume that if you're listening to this, you might be a nerd and you might know what a producer in a film's, like a producer on a record is different, than in a film. I mean, there are some, like in the Venn diagram, there are some commonalities, but there's a reason that the producer wins the Oscar for Best Picture.
Yeah,
and that's because they tie everything together. They're they are the liaison through which the director's creative vision is actualized. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
that is all.
Super important role, and she has played that role. And then I wanted to get into the world of editing, which is surprisingly, again, or maybe not surprisingly. I mean, we live in a time where women are still fighting to get into the director's chair. Mm-hmm. So maybe it makes sense that so many of the great editors of the past have all been women, because that is, again, a huge... I mean, it shapes the whole movie. Editing, you've seen those like YouTube trailers that they'll take a drama and edit it into like a comedy. Like we were talking about The Shining one the other day.
Shining.
Yeah. It's like editing can take, it can make or break a movie for sure. And it turns out, again, most of our favorite movies since like the 60s have been edited by women. And so I went to a screening of Lawrence of Arabia a couple of years ago, and they had...
Did you talk about British Beatlemania?
I did not talk about British Beatlemania.
Did you talk about Dylan, Berlin, Bay of Pigs Invasion?
No, I mean, that stuff was always burning as the world was turning.
Wow.
But Anne V. Coates edited Lawrence of Arabia, and that again is the movie that inspired Steven Spielberg to want to make big epic films, and that's another one that succeeds. I mean, for many factors, but one of the huge ones is the editing. Like, there's that super famous the match cut. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm gonna expose a vulnerability.
Oh, no,
I've never seen Lawrence of Arabia.
Well, when you have 4.5 hours to spare sometime.
Well, I think that might be why. And I've been preoccupied with my British Beatlemania.
There's a cut in Lawrence of Arabia where when he first gets assigned, to go there, he strikes a match and it's a profile shot of him holding the match, and then he blows out the match, and there's a quick cut to just the desert, and it's like the desert horizon, which is all black and this fiery orange sky. So it's almost like he blew the match to this shot, and it's just she talks about how that came about in the thing, and I think it was the same thing where there was like some weird thing in between or whatever, and she was just like, oh, this desert shot looks like fire, and so he blows out the match and it blows right to that shot, and then the sun rises over the horizon. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, so that and she won an Academy Award for that, Best Editor. But I was surprised that her filmography after that doesn't include like a lot of huge like films that we would know and love, even after winning an Academy Award in 62 or 63.
Well, one on the list that speaks to me, which I have seen, is The Elephant Man.
Yeah.
Which I remember seeing that shot in like stark black and white. It's actually directed by David Lynch. And a fun fact that I told Zach yesterday, produced by Mel Brooks, which you wouldn't think necessarily.
No, would not at all.
No. But yeah, that's another. Well, I mean, to say that's another story told by editing, it's like all movies. I mean, good movies have been ruined by bad editing. Okay movies have been made much, much better by editing. But I remember seeing the Elephant Man, and that was like the first time as a kid I feel like I really was able to wrap my head around the cruelty of man. I saw it maybe arguably like a little young,
Yeah.
because it looked like an old movie, but it was actually, I believe, from 1982.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Oh, 1980.
80.
Yeah, I didn't see that in its entirety until I was probably 20 or something like that. I remember that's another one that I had seen clips of. Like I knew what it looked like, but I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, I would say the same for me for Lawrence of Arabia. Like if you showed me a still from that movie, I would be able to identify it. I've read a lot about it.
She did some of Steven Soderbergh's stuff too. Like she did Out of Sight and Aaron Brockovich and maybe some other ones, but those were much later. Now we're talking late 90s.
Yeah, the strange that there was. Well, I wonder if I
don't know.
There's a number of reasons that there could be, including but not limited to stepped away from the business.
Yeah, could be.
Or didn't get
Thelma
work
Schoonmaker
because
has edited every single Martin Scorsese movie since Raging Bull. She apparently had no formal training initially. She responded to a New York Times ad that was looking for an assistant editor to help somebody edit European films for U.S. television broadcasts. And then she ended up... she took a 6-week course at USC, which is where she met Martin Scorsese, and ended up helping him edit Who's That Knocking on My Door? And then they both ended up getting hired as part of the editing team for the Woodstock documentary, which was nominated for an Academy Award for editing, didn't win. But basically, she almost couldn't find work for most of the 70s because she was not part of the union. And to be part of the union, you had to have years as an apprentice and do all this stuff. And she was like, I'm an Academy Award nominated editor already. Can't I just work in movies?
Yeah. Don't you think that this would blow me past a few hurdles here? Nope, sorry.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, she ended up, I think Scorsese helped pull some strings, but which still took a decade, because the Woodstock movie was 1970, and it wasn't until 1980 that she began working with him on Raging Bull and then edited all of his movies following that. And then, yeah, similar story with Sally Menke, who's done all of Quentin Tarantino's films. She just answered a call. She was doing some CBS television stuff and answered a call when he was looking for editors for Reservoir Dogs, and she just went in for an interview and did all of his movies until 2010. I think she died, sort of tragically. It sounds like, but everything from Reservoir Dogs to Inglourious Bastards was edited by Sally Menke. And then, okay, here's my big lead up here.
Yeah, I feel you're walking us down a path.
I am. I'm walking down a path. Another editor who started making her moves in the 60s, kind of broke in the 70s, is Verna Fields. who did a bunch of smaller projects. And then in the mid-'60s, she started teaching editing at USC, where one of her students was George Lucas. And so she hired George Lucas to help edit a documentary called Journey to the Pacific. And in that also reached out to other editors, one of which happened to be the person who would become George Lucas's wife, Marcia Lucas. So that's where they met, was editing Journey to the Pacific under Verna Fields.
Her maiden name was Brady, by the way.
Yes, it was Brady. Yeah. It was actually, and her middle name is also Marcia. So she's Marcia Brady.
Her middle name is Marcia.
But Verna Fields did end up going on to, in the 70s, she started working with Peter Bogdanovich. She did What's Up, Doc, The Last Picture Show, Paper Moon, and Daisy Miller. She also, when George Lucas was doing American Graffiti, she started American Graffiti. I think she left midway through, which is where George ended up hiring Marcia to finish editing American Graffiti. And that was also Academy Award nominated. And then Verna Fields she also edited for Spielberg. She did The Sugarland Express and Jaws, which she won an Academy Award for Jaws.
Wow.
But yes, so this brings me up to my big person. Sorry, that was a long ride. But Marcia Lucas, who basically got into editing. She had, according to Wikipedia, she had a boyfriend in '64 that worked for a Hollywood museum and wanted to hire her as a librarian to catalog movie memorabilia. But she had to go through a California State Employment Office, which ended up hiring her by a company called Sandler Films, and again, they were just looking for a film librarian. But she ended up becoming an assistant editor. And then obviously 67 got that job with Verna Fields, where she met George Lucas.
Sparks flew.
And next thing you knew,
she looked at that like bearded, bespectacled nerd and was like, "Wowie, wow, 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 wow!"
He was going on about his space saga. Well, it's a 12-part saga.
But I'm starting with episode 4. Swoon.
So it's about a kid with a laser sword, and he's got a father. But apparently, she also became sort of a sounding board for him and helped, helped shape a lot of those ideas. One of the things I was not surprised about, but learned recently, is that the closing scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, when, after, who's looking at it? Top men. And he goes out onto the stairs and Marion's waiting for him and they, walk off together. That scene was not originally in the movie. Originally, the last time you see Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark was, close your eyes, Marion.
Keep your eyes shut.
Ends. Yeah. And then she's gone. And apparently they held a screening, and afterwards Marcia Lucas was like, so what happened to Marion? What's the deal? His big love interest who was in the whole movie is just gone now. And so they ended up doing that scene on the stairs at the very end as a pickup shot because of her pointing that out. But yeah, apparently while Lucas was writing Star Wars, she played that kind of sounding board throughout the whole thing. But every aspect of making Star Wars was like a complete disaster. He couldn't get funding for it. Eventually he got a distribution deal through Fox, and they gave him like a little bit of upfront money to make it. And he ran out of that money, had to put his house up, basically just everything he could do to fund it. Meanwhile, even the cameramen were like, no, I don't want to shoot it that way. You don't know what you're talking about. All this stuff, props were breaking, sets were breaking. One of the sets when they're filming in Tunisia, sets got destroyed because there was a rare sandstorm or something like that.
Right.
Just the whole process was a mess. And including the original editor did this cut that just did not make any sense. And at that point, they still didn't have any sound effects, didn't have music, didn't have anything. And it was just the whole movie is a disaster. And so he fired the editor, and he brought on Paul Hirsch and Lucas Richard as new editors. And at the time, Marcia Lucas was editing New York, New York for Martin Scorsese. She had also done assistant editing on Taxi Driver and a couple other stuff. But while they were working on the edit, Lucas just kept going to her and being like, what do I do? What do I do? Like, how's this going to work? And eventually he just brought her on as the third editor, and she kind of took control of the control of the whole story. And like rearranged scenes, cut scenes, like, there was a lot early on. It kept bouncing back and forth between what was going on Star Destroyer with Vader and Leia and stuff, and Luke on the planet. She ended up cutting out all of that stuff with Luke Skywalker before you meet him at the Sandcrawler, just because it was just like chaotic back and forth. And then just like reordered some scenes, like where, apparently the scene where Darth Vader says like the power of the station is nothing compared to the Force. Like at that point in the original edit, you hadn't heard anything about the Force yet.
That's right.
So like she grabbed the scene with Obi-Wan talking about the Force to Luke and put that first, so you knew what it was talking about.
Well, it's a lot of those arrangements, specifically in this area that you're talking about, are kind of the heart of the movie. And I think it's also worth noting, well, firstly, you hipped me to this whole rabbit hole and provided me with a link to a documentary that I watched. And it's unbelievable. Like, without like delving too far down, it's a completely different story without these major editing choices that she made, and basically rearranged kind of like the second act of the film.
Yeah. The whole Death Star trench run thing was like, basically she added a huge story element that wasn't there initially, which was
now we're in the third act. Now we're in the third act.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So
right.
she fixed the intro. Also, it's worthy of note too. Sorry to jump in here, but George Lucas is also a contemporary of Steven Spielberg and Brian De Palma, and Marty Scorsese I call him Marty. They were all they're buddies, and so they would like check out each other's stuff, and I guess Brian De Palma was like furious at the original cut of Star Wars.
Yeah, there's I think it's in the Empire of Dreams documentary. There's an interview with Spielberg, and he talks about that first screening that George Lucas had with him and Marty, and he was like, De Palma just like went off the rails.
It was ridiculous.
How much it doesn't make any sense. What is that thing? What's going on? What are you talking about?
Yep. Yeah, and there's like a whole subplot, as you mentioned, like with Luke on the planet, which she cut out until. So the first time you see Luke is the first time he actually is engaged in the plot, which is after. I mean, it's pretty far into the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be at least 35 minutes in, right? If not more,
something like that. And then the second act we're talking about, this the whole interchange between now, the introduction to Obi-Wan. Where the Darth Vader and the baddies are going, like what that subplot, and then also introducing and connecting with Han Solo was a completely different story until she rearranged it into what we know now, And then the third act, I'll back out because this part's amazing.
Yeah, initially the attack run on the Death Star was just that. Like, they had the plans, they found the weakness, and they were going to go do the attack, and that was it. And she was like, but without like a threat looming beyond the existence of the Death Star, it's basically just the Rebel Alliance going to kill a bunch of Imperial people on a battle station.
Right.
And so she, like, the whole story element with the Death Star about to clear, the planet of Yavin to get to Yavin 4 where the Rebel base is so they can destroy it. Like, that whole thing was in and added in, and really nothing had been filmed for that. So it's all inserts and off-screen dialogue and stuff, or of the computer, like 4 minutes till the Rebel base. And even grabbing earlier shots of Tarkin looking at the Death Star monitor as he's monitoring the process of it getting closer to the Rebel base. Like, that whole whatever, what do they call it? The
narrative.
Well, the narrative, but the ticking clock aspect of it is
right,
we need to blow
right.
it up in the next 3 minutes or we're going to get blown up was not part of the original story. And that was all constructed through editing.
Because the only tension in what would have been
It's pretty amazing.
The end of that story, the end of that movie, would have been whether or not the rebel forces are destroyed by the Death Star before they can get the shot in. And what brings it that awesome tension is, and that the whole thing was achieved by off-screen narration, just really creative editing, and just like, another place that she came in was they originally had some shots like with a projection background when like Luke and C-3PO are in the speeder. They just looked awful.
Yeah.
And then it was her idea to like do a wide shot of a speeder, so like it with a voiceover. So these are also ways that, I mean, she didn't single-handedly do that, because there were reshoots involved, there's sound design, there's all that kind of stuff too, but but she can say, and did in this moment, this looks bad, if you just do this then it'll convey the same point. And there was a lot of efficiency of word brought to that movie by her. The movie was basically like, that was the first triumph of the whole process, was like, she has an edit that makes sense. Obviously they pulled the special effects together, the sound design's amazing, the score is incredible, but you wouldn't have even really had anything workable before her edit. So yeah, and she ended up, she did uncredited work, I guess, on Empire Strikes Back, and was one of the official editors on Return of the Jedi. And then she and Lucas divorced in '83. I guess she kind of blamed, his obsession with advancing the film industry and not really being much of a husband, being emotionally unavailable. And if you've watched interviews with Lucas, I don't see how she could come to that conclusion.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, he's just full of emotions bursting out of
passionate guy.
But yeah, she kind of stepped away from the industry after 1983. She didn't do a lot of other work, but she's got those Star Wars checks to fall back on, and not to mention all the other awesome things she's done. So
that was fun to learn about that. So thank you for introducing me to that story.
That was my pleasure. Anytime I could talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see your nerdy rabbit hole, and maybe even like introduce a nerdier one.
Please do,
if you're ready. Right. I would like to speak about Delia Derbyshire, spelled Delia, last name Derbyshire, pronounced that way, spelled Derby, Derbyshire. I go through the spelling because I encourage anybody who is interested in electronic music or recording or synthesizers or anything like that to check out a short documentary available on YouTube called The Delian Mode, Delian. So Delia Derbyshire is responsible for not just this, but the Doctor Who theme. And that was created in the BBC Sound Workshop, or the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, as it was called. So she went to school for mathematics, and then applied for a job at Decca Records, and was denied because at that point she was told they did not hire women as engineers. And worked a couple of other rando jobs, and then applied to the BBC Workshop, which was basically created almost against the will of the BBC. They wanted like nothing to do with it, but they had some redundancies in tape machines and stuff. So they basically collected all the extra junk that the BBC had and created a workshop wherein they created soundscapes and whatnot for radio plays to start, which then parlayed into television, which then parlayed into, what we know now. But At the time, there were no synthesizers, certainly no computers. There were tone generators, which they used, but there were no like synthesizers as we know now with keys and knobs, right? This even predates.
Sounds like a wow built into them.
Yeah, exactly. You push it and go pew, and then you can hit the knob and make it go pew, wow, 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 pew, pew. None of that. If you wanted that, somebody worked all day on that sound, and you needed to be very deliberate in wanting that sound. So she created rhythms, sounds, and songs eventually. She was a mathematician, and she wrote her songs out on graph paper and would like use household items like a lampshade, a metal lampshade, or like a percussion instrument, like one of those like horse hoof. Like, they have a name. It's not the right name. It's not called a horse hoof. Yeah. Or wine bottles with different amounts of liquid in them, like hit them, ding, ding, ding. But then she'd speed tape up, slow it down, manipulate it. She would create tape delays and tape loops. She would create rhythm with these sounds that she created by recording everyday items. By knowing that X amount of length of tape was one beat at a certain BPM, beat per minute. So she would cut that length, and that would be the note. And then if she wanted 2 beats of space in between that note and the next note, she would put 2 whatever inches of tape. This is like cut with a razor, splice in blank tape for space, tape it together with tape, and then create this whole thing. And then once she got that part done, so each note had to be recorded individually and edited individually, and the rhythm dictated by this math that she had in her mind. And that would be one tape machine. And if she wanted like another part, like a bass line or a melody or something, that was a whole different process in doing that, right? It was a whole different... she had to go through the whole thing again and create another piece of tape that had the spacing and all of this stuff. I mean, just talk about like diligence and meticulous. It just took forever to do each one. And then she puts it all on separate tape machines that are not linked with any sort of code or synchronization whatsoever. And she simply knew when to press play to introduce the next part.
Yeah, it's easy. You wait for the third lion roar, and then you press play.
That's right. Okay. See you on the dark side of the moon, sir. There's a story that she walked in, having graduated from a university in Cambridge. She ended up minoring in music and math, and she was, I think, there was one female student to every 10 male students there, right?
Wow.
So she was kind of like stuck out like a sore thumb there, but she walked in and she's like, "Oh, you have this book," which she had studied, and then opened it up and found all these problems with it and corrected it. It's like she was correcting the text that then the staff would use. So she was approached by the BBC. Sorry, did you have a thing?
Oh, no. Actually, I'll let you finish your history lesson before I interject.
Fair enough. Well, if you have something to say, please jump in. But
no, I was just going to say how like the ability to like use mathematics to manipulate sound and tape and all that, it just makes me feel so inadequate as a musician. Like
it's bananas.
As a person with a brain at all.
Like you and I could open up Pro Tools, which we record this show in, and we could try 50 ideas until we found out kind of what we wanted. Mm-hmm. Different tempos, different keys, different sounds. Each thing that we tried would take Delia Derbyshire weeks. Mm-hmm. So she knew what she wanted to do.
Calculations.
Yeah, exactly. So she was approached by, the BBC to do the music for Doctor Who, the effects, all that stuff. And there's a composer named Ron Granier who wrote the theme that they still use to this day. But it is she that realized that recording through this method that I hopefully adequately described. And no one got credit outside of being part of the BBC. So
Yeah, that would have been the royalty generating monster hit. Just because it's played on TV
she'd be
every day,
rich.
multiple times a day somewhere. Yeah, she'd be rich.
She'd
But
be
instead,
rich.
she was just a workshop employee.
That's right. And so she actually left the BBC when she worked with some early synthesizers that came in because it was new, but I think she was frustrated by how easy it was because then deadlines became like a thing. The better the technology, the faster you can do things. The faster you can do things, the less money a company has to spend, and they're going to ask you to do that. So she became frustrated and then kind of went up north and worked some various kind of rando jobs again. Got married. They separated. That apparently didn't go well. She had some mental health issues and leaned into alcohol a little much as self-medication.
Because she was pretty young when she was doing all that stuff on Doctor Who, right?
Oh, yeah.
And beyond that, just whatever, all the BBC workshop stuff.
Yeah. I think she tapped out when she was in her early, mid-30s, somewhere in there. So... And one thing that was not, again, check out that documentary if you like, but she recorded a lot of firsts. She invented things that we just take for granted now. You could say that she's the godmother of electronic music because she was creating these sounds before synthesizers, sequencers, drum machines, any of that. And certainly the tone of that 60s Doctor Who stuff kind of dictated how sci-fi still sounds. Ooh, like Twilight Zone would have been different without her. But when she passed away at I think age 64, they found a box of reel-to-reel tapes, some 267, I believe. Here, let me check my notes. Yes. She died in 2001. And 267 tapes of hers were found, including what has been determined to be the first electronic dance track, which is, just rhythms and sounds, but very specific, to move to, but all completely electronic, no organic acoustic instruments involved. Which is, I know that might be whatever, because everyone, you have a drum machine on your iPhone now.
Yeah.
But the lengths that she had to go through to create these sounds were nuts, and the level of genius involved in being able to imagine mapping out a song on graph paper. It's just
No, I can't imagine that.
no. I'm so
I mean, the other thing is, even as a kid in the 80s, I had a little synthesizer keyboard that had a built-in microphone, and you could record a sound into that microphone.
Tatiana Ali. Tatiana Ali.
And then you could play it anywhere on the keyboard, and it would, assign the pitch to whatever key you were playing.
That's right.
So you go, Tatiana Ali.
Tatiana Ali.
You could go. And that was all just key assignments based on 80s technology that could do that with a synthesizer. She had to... First of all, find a sound, envision what it might sound like at different speeds.
That's right.
But also calculate the frequency cycle to match that sound with whatever note that she wanted. In addition to, as you said earlier, calculating the amount of space that would need to be on each tape to get the right rhythm that she wanted. So it was all mathematics, but also the ability to pre-visualize what these sounds were going to sound like when she, recorded them, pitched them up or down. Sometimes, either playing it backwards or getting rid of the attack to just get the ring.
Yep.
Or just all this pre-visualization, precise mathematics, and a ton of time for something that maybe just wouldn't work when you get it done. But
right, but it was also a composition. She was writing melodies and songs and all this stuff. And she had said in that documentary that the BBC at the time would not hire composers, so she kind of backdoored it in there under the guise of sound effects.
That was the thing, though. If she mapped out a melody that she wanted, that she would have to then go in, mathematically work out the rhythm, how it would work with the tapes, and also to find what notes she wanted for the melody. Yeah, have to calculate what frequency cycle every sound would have to be sped up or slowed down to match that note.
Which could only be achieved through both imagination and expertise. One of my favorite quotes from that documentary is that, by the time like the late 70s and the 80s came along, finally there were sequencers and synthesizers and methods to lock various machines up so that they could play together CV voltage, CV link, which is a controlled voltage, could link drum machines to tape machines and other keyboards and stuff like that. So by that time, the quote was that technology had finally caught up to Delia, which is kind of amazing to think. Yeah. Talk about being ahead of you. She started in the 50s, so.
We, as Beatles fans, tend to think of like their tape loop experimentations, which were basically just, being for the benefit of Mr. Kite. They just went into the EMI basement, found a bunch of old like Calliope tapes, and chopped them up and glued them back together and just ran it through. Like there's no forethought into it beyond this is going to sound crazy when we chop it up and splice it back together. What she did was very, very meticulously thought out, pre-planned, and then attacked. It wasn't just like throw it at the wall and see if it sticks like what the Beatles did. No,
but also, they actually speak of the Deville. They appeared together at a show in the 60s that the Beatles were commissioned to make a what was then like an avant-garde sound collage. Going down the Delia Derbyshire rabbit hole has led me to hear an unreleased Beatles track that I'd never even heard of, let alone heard. So, they were both at basically their recordings appeared at a rave together, so they shared a bill. They were no doubt, anybody making music moving forward was no doubt influenced by the sounds that she made. Think about that Doctor Who theme, which we can't afford to play right now. But
I think a lot of the sounds that showed up on synthesizers later were, sounds that were trying to chase what she had done organically and through tape,
Most certainly. So I would also, in conclusion, my book report, you can search her on Spotify. I'm not sure about any other streaming services, but a great deal of her work is available, and that's worth just...
I will definitely do that.
Yeah, even if it doesn't speak to you, because don't get me wrong, it is strange music. Let's just say, the Doctor Who theme song is her biggest hit. So, but it's all very creative, and she did lots of collaborations with other composers, classical composers. She's heavily influenced by classical music, so you can check out Delia Derbyshire on Spotify.
Having not checked her out on Spotify yet, but having watched that documentary, I think I would almost recommend to people watch the documentary first.
Yes.
Because it will give you an appreciation for everything that she went through to create those sounds and basically create that method of making music.
That's right. Invented it out of thin air. It came out of her imagination.
Well, and that's the other thing, as a composer, writer, whatever, recorder myself, it's I think of a melody and chord changes, and then the production that goes around it is guitar will sound good, piano will sound good, things and sounds that already exist. She was just
creating instruments from scratch.
Exactly. Brand new, never been done before, who knows?
I want it to sound like this, but I don't want it to be a piano, so I'm going to manipulate this wine bottle with some water in it and then pitch shift it. It's just it's bananas.
It's bananas.
The part that gets me the most is the time editing, leaving space, but it just blows. I couldn't possibly, I can't do it. It's so above my pay grade that it just makes me kind of go blank, rainbow screen TV off air.
Well, without the mathematics education, it seems like the whole process would be impossible to even begin to approach.
So, that kind of is my conclusion on Delia. And so everyone that we mentioned before, comedy. We've touched on comedy. We've touched on like singing, dancing, movies. We've talked about science fiction movies, non-sci-fi movies. We have talked about songs and songwriting and even the invention of instruments. Mm-hmm. And so the whole point of talking about everybody that we talked about today is a big thanks a lot for the awesome stuff.
Yeah, thank you
without
for the
these
awesome
people,
stuff.
Yeah, without these women, our lives would be different and less bright.
Much, less awesome.
SAZETU is brought to you by Maine Spirits. Learn more about the spirits we bring into the state of Maine at mainspirits.com and what to do with them by downloading their app for your smartphone or visit them on Instagram at Maine_spirits. Promotional consideration provided by State Theater Portland. Learn more at statetheaterportland.com and Sun Tiki Studios. Learn more at suntikistudios.com.